Oh, welcome aboard. This is the Passball Show for Wednesday, the 22nd day of November, the day before Thanksgiving. Before I go any further, I want to wish everybody a happy and a healthy Thanksgiving. God bless you to your family, and hopefully you guys enjoy the festivities with those that are close to you and those that you know and love. Obviously, the Passball Show is brought to you by Pielli.com, and if you've gotten a chance to check out Pielli.com, I focused on the previous shows that I've done, which I've spoken about baseball history and conducted interviews with over 300 current and former Major League Baseball players, but the Passball Show expands a little further than that. We talk about baseball and baseball history. We talk about controversial sports topics, which we're going to get into in a couple minutes. And we've taken on the big task of unifying the people of the United States of America. And I'll be real brief with this monologue, reintroducing to you, if you haven't had a chance to listen to the program yet. The bottom line is that there's a lot more that most of us, if not all of us, can do to better our relationships amongst our own people and amongst those of us that have the difference between making this great nation and watching it crumble and fall apart right before our eyes. And the problem is, it's certainly the dividedness and the fact that there's polarizing opposites in regards to the people of this country. And what we really need to do at some point is be more open-minded to those that are different than us, and more open-minded to those that may have physiological, ideological, whatever it is, whatever the differences that we have. I've thrown the word politics in there, but it's something that I despise. I want to make it very clear that if you consider yourself a hardcore Republican or a hardcore Democrat or a hardcore liberal or a hardcore conservative, you are part of the problem. There's 4 major terrorist groups out there, starting with Al-Qaeda, and hopefully we as a nation have the ability to completely destroy them and make them non-existent. Then, of course, there's ISIS, but then we have the 2 terrorist groups that we have in our own country, which we call Republicans and Democrats. We're going to touch on that a little bit later. I want to throw the number out there in case you want to be part of the program. The number is 732-364-3598. John Pielli here, talking baseball, sports topics, and unifying America. First thing I wanted to get into, I want to talk about Hall of Famer Joe Morgan. And Joe Morgan, if you pulled up his stats to see what he's accomplished over the course of his career, there's no doubt he's a Hall of Famer. His .392 on-base percentage, and a stat that doesn't get thrown out there too much, but I rehearse and kind of throw out there a couple different times in his show. If you want to show somebody's ability and willingness and just non-doing, he's going to do everything he can to get on base. There's a difference between somebody's on-base percentage, which is calculated, of course, based off of plate appearances and whether you get to first base, second base, third, or home every time you get to the plate. And it doesn't matter if you get a hit, you get hit by a pitch, you can walk. It shows the percentage of time that you are on base in regards to the plate appearances that you have. Batting average, of course, is hits against at-bats. So when you have a non-base percentage, which is 121 itself, is certainly fine. There's no issues with him saying anything he said in that regard. And he put an open letter together, and I believe this came from his own heart, and something he truly is passionate about and believes in and stands behind. The one question that I have to ask Joe Morgan, and I'll be down at baseball's winter meetings in the second week of December, I hope to have the opportunity to see him there and meet him, because I would love to ask him this question. Joe, are you 100% sure that there are no players that have been inducted into baseball's Hall of Fame that have ever used performance-enhancing drugs? And it's a tough question to answer, and he could believe in his heart of hearts and being honest and truthful in his own opinion and his assessment of what he's seen in baseball and the way he's seen the process go out and the players that he has known and been there for the Hall of Fame induction ceremonies to see get inducted year after year. So that question will be the first one that I'd ask to him. Do you believe, honestly, in your heart of hearts, that there are no players that are in the Hall of Fame right now that use performance-enhancing drugs? And obviously, that would be a leading question, would lead me, based off of his answer, to my next couple questions. And one of them, and if you've heard me before talk about baseball's Hall of Fame, it is, to me, it is something that has changed to a point where I think baseball has screwed this up, whether it was intentionally, unintentionally, or negligibly, or just flat out missed the boat in a lot of things that have happened. They weren't harder on players using performance-enhancing drugs earlier. They allowed an entire generation just about to go by where players were using. Whether they had any way to test, whether they had any way to prove that players were using, the bottom line is players were using for a long time before baseball decided to crack down on it. So I have an issue with that because now you've almost grandfathered a generation of players that I understand. We talk about being right or wrong. And if we're going to talk about a player using any types of substance that's in their body that they shouldn't be using, there is a moral clause in that, and they should know that their decision to do that at any point, it certainly puts their character into question. But baseball enabled this for a long time. And we could talk about Commissioner Selig, who was inducted into baseball's Hall of Fame last year, but I'm not going to do that. I believe that most commissioners are going to become Hall of Famers, especially if they presided over the game for a long time. There were a lot of things that Bud Selig did and led and changes to the game that you have to give him credit for. Some people that dislike Selig don't believe he belongs in a Hall of Fame because he enabled the generation of players that were using performance-enhancing drugs. I don't necessarily think that's fair, but I agree with that point that's made. This is the commissioner that presided over the time where performance-enhancing drugs ran rampant in the game. Is there testing? Did he get together with the Players Association and set mandatory drug testing? Yes. But he still missed the boat for the amount of years that were going on. The home run chase of 1998 was a great rise from baseball. It almost took baseball out of the doldrums of where it was after the strike of 1994. The fact that a postseason and an entire second half of the season was wasted because the baseball owners and the Players Association couldn't come together on an agreement, on a collective bargaining agreement, was an embarrassment to baseball. Turned a lot of people away. I remember writing a term paper that I had for one of my college classes, and I wrote about the baseball's players' strike. And it was something that really dug deep into the minds of those that love this game, a game that obviously has the heritage and can be traced back to so many different important times in American history. It's American as apple pie. It's American as the blues. It's American as baseball. So when we talk about, and I'm not going to change the subject here, when we talk about unifying the people of America, baseball is America's pastime. It was almost destroyed after the strike in 1994. What brought it back? The home run race between Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa in 1998. And we can't, in spite of how tainted we want to say that those players were and the record, the home run record that they ended up passing was, we can't ignore the fact that they existed. And if the baseball writers decide to hold these players out, and we're talking about McGwire and Sosa, who, by the way, are not the most prominent players to be linked to performance-enhancing drugs. You start with Barry Bonds, you start with Roger Clemens, you talk about Manny Ramirez and Rafael Palmeiro, who, by the way, you're talking about two players that had done things that very seldom, if at all, had been done before. That all of a sudden we forget about them. And if we're talking about players that use performance-enhancing drugs or are implicated or assumed to be using performance-enhancing drugs that are left out, we have to start with those four first. We start with Bonds and Clemens, and we move on to Palmeiro and Ramirez. Then we could talk about McGuire and Sosa and anybody else that you want to throw into the equation. But going back to what Joe Morgan was saying, he feels, and I guess after I'd ask him that first question to see what his answer is, does he believe that there are no players that used any sort of performance-enhancing drugs? He may dance around the answer. He may not be direct with it. He may say that he honestly doesn't know. He may say he believes in his heart and hearts that all the Hall of Famers that exist right now are 100% clean. And if he does, good for him. And honestly, if that was the answer to his question, I would further back the points that he made. That being said, Mr. Morgan, I respectfully disagree with your plea to the Baseball Writers Association of America. And I disagree, once again, respectively, sir, for this reason. Amongst the substances that the baseball has decided to ban, at some point got to amphetamines. And I believed and I agreed with baseball's drug testing and what they were able to remove from the game in regards to steroids and performance-enhancing drugs. It was great to see that players that failed drug tests, and in some cases prominent players, Rafael Palmeiro, Ryan Braun, Manny Ramirez, just to name a few, those were probably the best players that ever failed a drug test under this new policy. But when they expanded it and decided to get to amphetamines, I thought it was a tricky situation. It really was. We're talking about amphetamines, which could be traced probably and possibly even further, but could be traced to the days of Ted Williams. Ted Williams was one of the three greatest offensive baseball players to ever play this game. There's Ted Williams, there's Ty Cobb, and there's Babe Ruth. And if we're going to talk about the discussion, we can open it up, and trust me, I'll throw numbers at you to back this. It's pretty hard to put anybody that ever played this game as a position player up in the same league as Ted Williams, Ty Cobb, and Babe Ruth. I think Babe Ruth may be in a league of his own. Ty Cobb's pretty close, and it's pretty hard to say anyone's going to touch either one of them as the top two. Ted Williams was the greatest pure hitter the game has ever seen. What he was able to sustain over his career, hitting .347 and retiring in 1961, speaks to his dominance over the game. And if he played in the era of a Cobb or in the era of a Babe Ruth, his batting average would have been even higher. He may have hit even more home runs. So I'm talking about Ted Williams because Ted, while he was still with us, admitted that he used amphetamines over the course of his career. So if a player right now, player A, and I'm not even throwing a name out there, we're going to say this player, a prominent player on a prominent team that's a legitimate all-star that is going out there every single day, putting up great numbers, is considered one of the top players in the league, is found to be using amphetamines. Baseball docks him for it. It becomes public. They are known in what you call the court of public opinion as being a drug user. Now, we got to understand that there is a major difference between greenies, amphetamines, stimulants, a kind of a graduated version of caffeine you get from your coffee. If a player that has used them now in 2017 is going to be viewed in the same way that a player that used steroids was in the 1990s and 2000s, and maybe even back to the 80s, then there's a problem with that. Because there's Hall of Famers and a great long list of Hall of Famers. If you asked them whether they used amphetamines, they would say yes. Because we have a trust in baseball's Hall of Famers, because they have set the model of what its new and incoming members should stand to. Ted Williams, Mickey Mantle, Reggie Jackson, and the list will go on and on when we talk about dominant players that are no doubt in your mind and no doubt in my mind, Hall of Famers that used amphetamines. Did they use steroids? No. And if I asked them that and they said no, I'd believe them because there was never any proof that any one of them used any type of anabolic steroid over the course of their playing career. But we don't judge the players that used amphetamines for years upon years upon years. And they could have gone back as far as the 1940s or the 1930s. And understand that a stimulant is not in its own right enhancing somebody's performance. If I'm taking a greenie, if I'm using bee pollen, which is a modern version of it, I have extra energy. I have a graduated effect of that of coffee, and I'm able to stay here and babble with you for, if I need to, hours upon hours upon hours. I can't go to the baseball field and hit the ball any further because I'm on an amphetamine. So players that used amphetamines did not get any benefit that made them a better player, that allowed them to hit the ball farther, or if they were a pitcher, allowed them to throw the ball harder because they used amphetamines. But now there is some confusion out there because of baseball's drug testing policy and the fact that they chose to ban amphetamines, that we use this thing, and I tell you, this thing that I'm about to bring up is more powerful than the court of law. It's more powerful in baseball than the Baseball Writers Association of America, who's considered the Bible in regards to who gets in a Hall of Fame and who gets left out. This thing I'm about to bring up is called the Court of Public Opinion. And in the court of public opinion, if a player that gets caught once, twice, three times, whatever, using amphetamines, there's going to be confusion because a lot of people don't understand. There's going to be some feeling that they are using something that's close to a steroid or a performance enhancer, or what they've accomplished on the baseball field is tainted because they used amphetamines. This is where this gets confusing because we have tons and tons of Hall of Famers. And I could put the list, and I want to ask each individual Hall of Famer that I speak to, and I will when I go to the baseball winter meetings in Orlando, did you use amphetamines? And you know what? If a player says that they did, it doesn't make them a bad person. It doesn't make them a drug abuser. It doesn't make them a steroid abuser. It's something that I think should be put out there more to say that, all right, amphetamines now, they're banned. They're not, the players that play today cannot use them because they're drug tested for them. If they're found to be using them, they're going to be held accountable and likely have to serve a suspension. So the players they used before, amphetamines, it wasn't a deal breaker in regards to the Hall of Fame. Now, because of what I mentioned, the court of public opinion, because that's out there, they could be judged to be doing something worse than they already are. So there's never going to be a battle to try to, first of all, take Hall of Famers out of the Hall of Fame if they're found to be using performance-enhancing drugs. Yes, if there's a player, and I'm not going to name anybody because I believe in the being innocent until proven guilty. So if there's a player that is found or decides that they're low on money as they are adding on in their years, going into their latter years per se, decide to write a book and admit to using steroids over the course of their playing career, and they want to say, hey, they were in the Hall of Fame, sure, there's going to be some backlash. There's going to be some living Hall of Famers that are going to want to see that player taken out, but there's no way that's going to happen. So if you're going to take it a step further, and we're going to start to use players by their names that used amphetamines and say because amphetamines are not permitted in the game right now, you're never going to take them out of the Hall of Fame either. So baseball has created this. And I understand the players should be held accountable, and that court of public opinion is going to judge any player regardless of what they do. Just like they're going to judge me. I'm judged on everything that I say. And if I go out there and I say something stupid, the court of public opinion can take those statements and hold them against me. I don't have to break the law. But anything that I say can and will be used against me in the court of public opinion. So we can judge. We all have the right. We all have our own mouth. We all have our own brain. We can process a thought, bring it up through our larynx, and expound and say it. But everything we say will be used against you, especially if it could be recorded, right? And obviously everything I'm doing is live. It's recorded. There's nothing that I will say that I can retract. I can apologize for something if I say something stupid, and Lord knows at some point I will. But my words are going out to you, and you have the right to judge me based off of the words and the way that I put them together and the points that I make. But as it applies to baseball, players that are using amphetamines now, and I'll take a player, whatever player you want to use, that could go out there and get 3,000 hits, but could be suspended at 1 point or 2 points or even more for the use of amphetamines, is going to have that held against them by the baseball writers, who should, because of their position, understand the difference between amphetamines and steroids. But we have to understand that there are several players in baseball's Hall of Fame that used amphetamines. They don't need to be called out. I'm never going to mention them by name. But there are very good players that have played in this game for a long time that relied on amphetamines. And while amphetamines may not make you hit the ball harder or throw the ball harder, it gives you more stamina. It allows players to play a day game after a night game and still be, from a stamina standpoint at a top level. Players nowadays don't get that opportunity. Careers are cut shorter. Players lose stamina a lot earlier. They play in less games. Look at the average amount of games that are played now. There are several teams in Major League Baseball in 2017 that didn't have a player playing 150 games. Some of it was because of injuries. Others is because the average player needs a day off after playing a late game and playing a day game the next day. And you give a lot of players a lot of credit for their stamina. But I'll tell you this, Cal Ripken Jr. would probably not be able to play in the amount of consecutive games as he played in if he was playing today. And it's not a knock against Cal Ripken. Cal Ripken, a first ballot Hall of Famer, one of the best shortstops to ever play the game, Mr. Baltimore Oriole, was the franchise icon ahead of Brooks Robinson, Frank Robinson, Jim Palmer, or anybody else you want to throw out there. There's a player that certainly played in a Ripken-like shadows that's playing right now in Manny Machado. I got a feeling Manny Machado could have a consecutive game streak going if he was using amphetamines. We have to accept and understand that the game has changed. And by doing that, we have to understand its history and go back from the days of the 1800s to the 20th century, the early part of the 20th century, and all the different changes that the game has gone through. Because it's gone through a lot. The game wasn't integrated for a while, which never should have been the case. You have players that played in the Negro Leagues that were just as good as players that played in Major League Baseball. But it's hard to quantify their stats. And it's hard to match one player up against the next if you're playing a 30-game season as opposed to a 154-game season. So baseball has followed an a ridiculous evolution. You could say we can't compare players that played in 1910 to players that played now, or players that played in the 1980s to players that played in the 1950s. Different eras produced top players in that era. And the same thing as we go on, and long after I'm gone and long after most of us are gone, we're going to look back at the time of baseball from the late 80s to the early part of the 2000s and understand that it was just a different era. Just a different era, like the pre-dead ball era of the 19th century to the dead ball era, which went up to about 1920. What about the days after Babe Ruth started hitting home runs? To integration, where black players were treated the same and accepted in Major League Baseball just like they should have been all along. And a lot of different changes, and there's been a lot of different times in the game, but we still at some point should acknowledge the best of each generation. That's why there are several Negro Leagues players that never played in Major League Baseball because they didn't have the opportunity to, that are inducted into baseball's Hall of Fame. That's why there's players from the dead ball era and the 19th century that are in baseball's Hall of Fame. Did some of them hit a ton of home runs? No. But they were the best players of that era. And at some point, we're going to acknowledge the best players from the quote-unquote steroids era, because remember, going back to my point about the court of public opinion, that's the strongest court of law that exists in this world. Stronger than any court of law. Whether it's on a local level, national level, international level, the court of public opinion. It's something that somebody has to take with them, whether something's true or not in some cases. And we're talking about Barry Bonds, Roger Clemens, Manny Ramirez, and Rafael Palmeiro, who, if you want to put an asterisk by what they did, that's fine. If you want to say that they are, maybe a separate wing or something in baseball's Hall of Fame, sure, go ahead, do it. I have no issue with it. But they belong. Pete Rose belongs in baseball's Hall of Fame. Joe Jackson belongs in baseball's Hall of Fame. And I've said this all along. This is the last point I'm going to make about this, because we're about to hit the bottom of the hour here. Cuckoo clock's going to go off any second. If the decision is made to hold certain players out that are deserved based off of their production and their numbers and what they accomplished over the course of their careers, if they're held out of the Hall of Fame, baseball's Hall of Fame needs to take everything that they represented, everything that they've accomplished that's shown in its Hall of Fame out. Barry Bonds' 756 home run bat needs to be removed. The bat where Pete Rose got the record-breaking hit, 41-91, to break Ty Cobb's record, needs to be taken out. You need to go full force with this. If they're not Hall of Famers based off of any of the different things that we put out there, whether they gambled, whether they used performance-enhancing drugs, whether, whatever it is that's holding them out, take their name and their namesake out of the Hall of Fame. The ball where Roger Clemens did whatever, got his 4,000th strikeout. Take it out of the Hall of Fame. And be strong enough and man enough to do that. And say that you want to take the little Johnny's experience when he's going over to Cooperstown for the first time. Halfway point here on the Pass Ball Show. Once again, this is John Pielli, happy to be with you on the 22nd day of November 2017. Talking about baseball's Hall of Fame, and I really am adamant about that. And I'll make my point kind of going back to where it was before, where we started talking about Joe Morgan. And Joe Morgan's statement, if you haven't read it yet, an open letter to the baseball writers saying, listen, let's keep the players that use performance-enhancing drugs out. Once again, I can't confirm, and neither can you, that there are no players in the Hall of Fame that use performance-enhancing drugs and steroids. And you know what? The last point I'll make could be taken as a shot by one of my favorite players of all time. Mike Piazza admitted in his book that he used Andro. Now, Andro is not considered an anabolic steroid. However, Andro is banned. It's a banned substance. So a player that tests positive for Andro now will be put in the category of a steroids user. So if you're a Piazza fan, just like I am, if you are a diehard Mike Piazza fan, you're going to have to understand that there's a good chance that he took performance-enhancing drugs. Maybe not anabolic steroids, but he could be considered one of the players that are in the Hall of Fame that use performance-enhancing drugs. So, Joe Morgan, listen, I appreciate where you're coming from. And like I said, if I get the opportunity to meet you, I want to ask you these questions. Do you really think that there's no steroid users in the Hall of Fame right now? Because if you really don't think there is, with all due respect, sir, I disagree. Right now, I'm happy to be joined by a man who goes back with me many years. He is the host of the Carlucci Show, and that is Gregg Carlucci. Gregg, what's going on, man? Good to hear your voice again. Yeah, now this is what it's all about, brother. So first thing I want to get into with you, because there's a couple topics I do want to hit up while I have you on the phone here with me. First, talk a little bit about your show, where it's going, and the next opportunity that people are going to get a chance to hear you.
Well, John, I mean, I don't have to explain it to you. I have to explain it to your audience. You've been with me since day one. John and I went to Connecticut School of Broadcasting in Hasbrook Heights, New Jersey, and 8 years ago, right now, we went November 9th. And started the Lucha Leone show with you, and then you went off and kind of did your own thing with the Fastball show, and then I started the Carlucci Show. So we've been at this racket, as the kid from Brooklyn says, for almost 8 years now.
Yeah, it's been.
John's been a huge part of my show. He's been on a lot. I even have asked you to come on just to sit there, if I'd like to call it for a guest in case something happens. But John's been with me since day one. I've had the opportunity to interview every genre of, I guess you can call it, celebrity, actors, actresses, comedians, radio personalities, TV hosts, models, blah, blah, blah. And just kind of got to the point where about 8 months ago, I just said, let me slow down with this and let me kind of concentrate on myself, on my own life. Because as you know, when you do this, for as long as we have, it can really take a toll on you.
No, absolutely. Just like anything else you do, man. If you're passionate about something, you put everything you got into it. And, that's what I do. I know you do the same thing. So obviously it takes a ton of your energy. So there's ups and downs with it. Of course, we've spoken about it to each other, just, night after night after night. Geez, sometimes. But obviously, when you put everything you got into something, it's going to take something out of you because it's taking everything you got to do it.
What do I always tell you? The best shows are when you're on the phone, like off the air. You were married already. This affects relationships sometimes because girls, they want to get married and, stop doing the show. And you're not going to give up your dream. I mean, especially when I was in my younger years. I was like, screw you, I'm going after this. But, job-wise, I left my career and, finally after a while you start to grow up a little bit and you realize that you're not going to be world famous and rich like we thought we were going to be after the first 2 weeks doing this friggin' show. You got to take a step back, like anybody else. You got to take a chill pill. You got to kind of take a deep breath, and I'm ready to go. I had a show. I don't know if your audience knows who Vicky McKenna is, but he's that famous comedian who does that bread and milk video. He's had 250 million hits on his YouTube videos and whatnot. And I was in the WCTC studio that you broadcast from.
Yeah.
And lasted 5 seconds on AM radio. They didn't dump the word fuck. Are we allowed to say that on your show?
Yeah, as long as it's not repetitive. I mean, you're quoting somebody, so it's okay.
Yeah, it wasn't me. It was Vic. So basically I said, all right, well, maybe that's the sign that I'm not supposed to get back to this right now. And I took a couple more months off, and now I was contacted by a person who now hosts for the star in this pilot called Mob King. Real mobster. He's been to jail, and he's done a lot of things in his life. Great guy. He's not like that anymore. And that got canceled, but that got the fire going. So I'm going to go back to the Connecticut School Broadcasting where we started this whole thing. Like I say, back to Mickey's gym. And I'm going to do it from my house. I'm going to try to get into a bar down the shore.
Now, over the course of your career doing radio, you've had a chance to interview, some of the, ideal names in the world of entertainment. Obviously the goal is to keep that going. Just for my listeners, and obviously those who have listened to the Past Ball Show for years would know this, but
right.
there's many different forms and different ways that I'm trying to get out there now. So there's a chance that some people that are listening, aren't as much familiar with your show as they should be. So, real quick, take them through what an average listen of the Carlucci Show would be.
The Carlucci Show is it's what's called entertainment radio, which I was told. It's similar to the Howard Stern Show, except I'm not trying to be like Howard Stern, like every other Tom, Dick, and Harry in America that does an internet radio show. Howard Stern is who he is. He's the godfather of this type of radio. So you have to clear your path to do your own thing. But, basically, I mean, you're sports. You have something where I always told you that you can just sit there by yourself and you can give your opinion on everything. You're more of a opinion on a fact radio host. We were just talking about Piazza, and then you'll give your opinion. With me, it's more, I don't like to say this, but it's more of a bar conversation. It's just sitting around. I've had, and sometimes I have friends, I have a panel, we just bullshit. Those are some of the best shows, that. Or I'll just do one-on-one with famous, person, so to speak. And sometimes those are the best shows. Like with one of my best interviews was actually with Dick DiVittello the first time, and then that sit-down interview I had live in the studio with Tony Napoli, who was actually like De Niro in the film Casino. So, he tells you stuff that's just crazy. But, it's just, we're going to throw F-bombs out there. We're going to talk about crazy stuff. But,
Because especially if you're interviewing a celebrity, I've interviewed a lot of athletes, they get interviewed all the time. So down the road, 5 years down the road, you don't want to be that idiot that goes up to them and says, hey, I did an interview with you, and that person to be like, wow, did you? Oh, yeah, you must have, man. I don't really remember that.
Interviews are not easy because interviews are manufactured. Most of the ones that you see on TV, it's just a guy in your ear telling you what questions to ask.
Yes.
So going down the list of questions. And like I say, people think, they tell me, I interview people, for my job all the time. I know how to interview. I'm like, get the hell out of here. That's like such a generic, tell me about your faults, your weaknesses, your positives, your strengths, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, it's off a clipboard.
And you saw it with AJ Benson, okay? When I interviewed AJ Benson, that was a call-in the first time. It was awesome. I mean, we literally were on the phone for an hour and 45 minutes. We were laughing because I didn't study anything about it. Piece of paper, so you grew up here, but he's going, come on, you serious? No, AJ is. And AJ really did teach me, don't ever do that again. And what I like to say when I interview people, I don't like to know a lot about that person. I want to find out about them while I'm interviewing them. And at the end of the interview, I literally will lean back in my chair and say, wow, me, amazing 2 hours.
And once again, John Pielli, happy to be joined by Gregg Carlucci, the host of the Carlucci Show. I want to back up off the point that you just made, because you could sit there and read off of a series of questions and get generic answers that people are used to answering. But the key that I do when I do interviews, and I know you do the same thing, is you want to, yes, have information, idea of who you're talking to. All right, that's fine. But you want to ask questions that you don't know the answer to. Because first of all, you're engaged because you can't wait to hear what this person says, because you don't know what they're going to say. And also you gain the respect of them because you know what? They're like, wow, this person wants to know a little more about me. He isn't this generic moron that's reading questions off a clipboard.
So what you do is you let them talk about themselves, and then you go off what they said.
Yeah.
You're not prepared. You're not sitting there. Look, of course I'm going to study them a little bit for 5 minutes. Now, okay, they were in this movie, that. But another prime example, and I'm not trying to bring out big names, but Robert Davi, when he called it ended up being an hour and a half. But I mean, he was really pissed at me in the beginning because you never know who you're going to get. He was mad at me because I didn't see one of his movies.
Yeah.
And I understand that. It was 007. But I was like, look, I was more into Goonies than I was 007. But usually it works. But, you can't be prepared. You're not reading every book of every guy that you interview, Pielli. And they think you are, and they're expecting you to, most of them. But you can't. You have to work around that. And you really have to have an ability to kind of portray to them or convey to them that you know a lot about them, when in actuality you really don't.
Now, of course, and you get into times where interviews go wrong. Listen, it's happened to everybody. Even the best of the best that are out there getting paid, multi-million-dollar, on contracts and stuff like that, they have a bad interview. Sometimes it's, a person having a bad day, or a person that is, 3,000 miles away in California that you're talking to on the phone. You never know what they're going through while they're talking to you. So you got to accept the fact that, yes, if you're doing an interview, sometimes it's going to go bad. But the key is you have to be able to get through it. You have to understand that you are interviewing a person, but you're interviewing a person for your audience, and they don't need to see your feathers ruffled just because you're having a bad interview.
Mm-hmm.
And
to be great in this industry is you can't just go to your basement on where to a podcast and think that you're a radio. They can do that now.
Yeah.
But you gotta really seriously, just like actors, just like people you hear that are very successful, you have to go through the gamut of bullcrap. You have to go through the interviews where it's like, oh my God, I nailed it, unbelievable. And then you have to go through the interviews where you just want to come up with a ball and hide in the closet.
Yeah. Now listen, I've been through interviews where, man, I'm like, I want to cut this short. I want to get everything I can out of this, and I just can't wait for it to be over. But I know the people that are listening to the interview, or the people that are going to listen to it on playback, are going to be happy with the named guest that I got. So I got to sustain it a little bit longer. And there's a couple, and I could tell you off air exactly who they were. But the bottom line is that sometimes you're interviewing a person because of their name, but the interview might be going like crap. So you're trying to come up with just enough material to get through it, so you can say, hey, I did an interview with this person.
Pielli, you're also dealing with very, very, very large ego. They've experienced a lot of success in their career, a lot of attention. And I mean, if you don't nail it, if you don't ask them the right stuff, especially interesting stuff, they're going to be like, no, who are you? Especially us. Who are we? I'm talking to Robert Davi. He's like, all right, listen. And it was funny. He was calling me Carlucci. He's like, all right, listen, Carlucci, back up. I knew what he was talking about. I'm an A-list actor, at least from the 80s and 90s. And here's some internet radio guy that I've never heard of. You probably got 2 listeners. I'm giving you my time. You should have prepared more for this. And you learn that.
No, of course. And that's the most important thing. You go through certain experiences, whether you're doing interviews or just, doing a live show. You go back and you listen, you're like, man, I wish I would have done that a little differently. And I'll tell you, the biggest thing that I learned for myself doing radio is to get away from the transition words. Transition words come from when you're not sure of something. If you're stumbling through something, you know what? You throw a lot of extra garbage in there that you don't really sense is going on as you're saying it. But then you listen back and you're like, wow, that didn't sound very good for the people that were listening to me. And
No.
to quote the great Joe DiMaggio always said that he played the game 100% every single day, no matter what, even when he was hurt, because there was some little kid that was at that stadium that was going to see him the first time. So he was damn right going to see the best of Joe DiMaggio.
Yeah.
And that's how I go with it now. I say, all right, you know what? If I screw something up, all right, I could get through it. I could have a bad moment, but I'm not going to let it, make me have a bad show.
Look, the good thing about what we did that separates us from a lot of people is that we actually were professionally trained. We both went to college, both got degrees, but we also went to broadcasting school, and I'm not plugging it, but an elite broadcasting school in a Connecticut school of broadcasting. So we were taught, all these different things and how to react. But you have to have the gift. You can, again, be taught everything, but you have to have the gift. You have to have the ability. Like when I interviewed Beanie Siegel, I didn't know a thing about him. I didn't even know he was, famous until after the interview. But it was one of my better interviews, and it was my first quote-unquote celebrity interview. You just got to know how to go with the flow with the whole situation.
Now, of course, once again, John Pielli here with Gregg Carlucci, who you will be able to see, whether it's video or on the radio very soon. Carlucci Show is up and running. He's going to have a very well-known guest, just like he has over the past 7+ years. And, I can't believe it, man. And it's kind of corny to say this on the air, but, I really can't believe it's been almost 8 years already.
It's amazing. Absolutely amazing. I cannot believe it. Time flies so much. I mean, years go by now at our age, like months went by back in the day. So it's quite humbling to see and look back what we've accomplished, but at the same time, it's kind of like, all right, so we paid our dues. You're better than people out there. I'm not saying I'm the greatest. I'm not trying to be arrogant, but you know that you're better than some people out there that are actual, getting paid for it.
Now, listen, I say this all the time, man. It's not – I don't think it's arrogance because of the nature of the business that we're in. Anybody that doesn't believe that they're good at this probably doesn't belong. So you almost need to kind of pump your chest out every once in a while and acknowledge that you have the ability. Now, I think there's a borderline. You could go, be pompous and arrogant and maybe rub people the wrong way. But there is a certain amount of confidence that you need to have to be successful when you're dealing with an audience. You're not just doing it for yourself. You're doing it for the people that are listening and watching you. So you better believe that you're good.
Yeah, you definitely have to believe that you're good. You're right. And that's what I always say. I mean, I'm in sales professionally. I'm not the best salesman. I'm not arrogant, but damn, I think I'm the best radio host.
Now I'll tell you, listen, man, I'm far from the best deli clerk, but I know I'm one of the damn best radio shows. Hey, listen, before you go, man, and once again, this is Gregg Carlucci. I'm happy to have you on the program and certainly have you on many more times as we go on. Quick plug, talk about the Carlucci Show, the Carlucci Show website, and where the listeners and viewers could check you out.
Well, again, there's so much stuff and content that you just get lazy after a while. You just stop organizing it. But people always say, "Why? Where do I find your show?" And half the time I don't even know. But I have a website, carluccishow.com. You can see hundreds and hundreds of pictures. And I have a YouTube site, the Carlucci Show. There's about 119 videos up there. Most of them are short, 2 or 3 minute videos of just awesome guests of me filming them. I have 80 more to put up. And then on the Ustream, if you just type in ustreamtv.com and just type in the Carlucci Show, you'll see I think there's 137 shows, so you can choose, whatever show you want to listen to. But
that is the host of the Carlucci Show, Gregg Carlucci. We'll definitely talk soon, buddy. Thanks for coming on.
All right, thanks. Have a good show.
All right, that was Gregg Carlucci, host of the Carlucci Show. Like I said, you can check out his website, carluccishow.com. He's going to be back on doing shows with celebrity guests. And honestly, if you look at the list of the names that he has had on his show, they're going to impress you. And I guarantee you, if you're into entertainment, if you're into celebrities and people that are well known, you're going to find some guests that he's had on his show that are going to go, you're going to be pretty impressed with. Once again, this is John Pielli, Pass Ball Show, with you for another 7 minutes or so. And I do want to talk, as we always do here on the Pass Ball Show, like I said, 3 things: baseball and its history, controversial sports topics, and unifying America. And I think this is one of the most important things that we have to take a step back and, start to appreciate each other a little more. And I continue, and I want to grow and be a better person every day. And I think that's one of the most important traits that an individual can have, to strive to get better. Not just better at their profession, but better as a human being. And we need to ask a little more questions. We need to, when we're talking about polarizing opposites, and listen, we're getting into Thanksgiving. Tomorrow's going to be Thanksgiving. Odds are you're going to be with a large group of family and friends, people that you know and love. And you're going to be striking up conversation. First question: should we talk about the weather? You're going to talk about how it's cold outside, or maybe it's abnormally hot for Thanksgiving, whatever. And then you're going to talk about what? Politics and the government. It's going to come up in your conversation when you're at the Thanksgiving dinner, whether it's before you eat or after you eat, or while you're sitting there on the couch with your beer watching football. Understand that there's going to be people you love and people you know that are going to have conflicting views with you. And it is irresponsible, and I'm telling you this right now, if you go out of your way to engage them in a heated debate. Because just as passionate as you are about your politics and your beliefs, that other person is just as passionate. And you should feel you have no right to tell them that they're wrong, because you haven't walked in their shoes. They may not have walked in your shoes either. But we have to turn these, what start out as passionate debates that turn into hate speeches and fights and arguments, into more peace and understanding about what you're about and what they're about, and the reasons that somebody that may not have the same upbringing or may not have the same history in their life has, that I can learn something from that person. And I care, because God created us all as his children, and he loves each and every one of us the same. So if he loves each and every one of us the same, it's obvious he didn't create any one of us better than the other. But things happen in each and every one of our lives that make us into what we are and make us believe what it is that we believe. So please, take a step back. Have conversations, but ask questions. And take that family member or that friend or that person that is on the other side, has joined the other cult. Is in the Democratic cult as opposed to the Republican cult. Or vice versa. And don't make it about how much you love or hate the president, because he's not the problem. We are. Once again, the United States was created as a nation of other people with all differences that come from all different nationalities and races and religions. And that's why it's formed what we call the melting pot. And the melting pot is all of us put into a mold. And even though we have so many differences, we are all equal. And we need each other. For that person that's listening to the show right now that couldn't, in their own mind, be any more different than me, I need you. You need me. And if we continue to progress in a way where we're more open-minded to each other and understanding that we have differences and they're understanding that we have differences, we can get back to where we were before we got to this major divide that exists in our country right now. Because there's division. There's division that is just as prominent right now as it was in the 1960s. And in some cases, it might even be getting worse. Unfortunately, the backdrops of everything that was going on in that decade probably isn't near what we could end up getting to. Big thanks to Gregg Carlucci for being part of the program. We're not going to do a show tomorrow, but we'll be back with you Friday right here on Periscope, Facebook Live, and the videos will be able to be viewed later on YouTube. So thanks for being part of the program. God bless you. And as always, I'll see you on the other side.